Oh, friend, I am so excited to introduce you to today's guest that I almost forgot to greet you. Hi, my name is Jasmine Starr, and you're listening to a business podcast for hustlers designing a life they love. Okay, that's enough of that for now. We're going to go on to today's incredible guest, my sweet friend, Sandra. For more than 15 years, Sandra has successfully blended business leadership, entrepreneurial innovation, and creativity. Sandra hopes to provide access to the untold stories of exceptional African women that will resonate, inspire, and ignite strength through her podcast, Nadini. She believes that our greatest responsibility is to share our stories so we can inspire and create possibility for others. Y'all, I can't prepare your hearts, because today we talk about how she went from being raised in a mud hut in Zimbabwe to attaining her master's degree from Columbia Journalism School, her mission of changing the singular narrative the world has about African women, and so much more. I absolutely adore Sandra, and I'm completely in awe of her, and I know you will be too. So let's listen in. I am about to introduce you to somebody who has just rocked my world, turned it upside down, and in a really unexpected way. So let me walk you back to 2018. And I am on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood, California. And I had nervously and trepidatiously signed up for a mastermind. And I didn't know anybody in the mastermind, but it was our first get together. We're in Los Angeles, and I get an Uber. I'm at the hotel, then I get an Uber to the restaurant, and I am intentionally trying to show up about 8.5 minutes late, because apparently that's what the cool entrepreneurs do. It's like that 8.5 minute mark. So I get out of my Uber. I'm completely nervous. It's at Red O, a very popular Mexican restaurant. And I walk in and it's extraordinary ostentatious. I mean, I'm talking about 16 or 20 foot ceilings. Everything's decorated with terracotta walls, and there's music playing, and there's past hors d'oeuvres, and there's drinks. And normally people would feel like, wow, this is really amazing. And your girl is so nervous and nauseous sick that I make a swoop of the room. I don't know anybody, and I don't know how to jump into conversations. So I go into the bathroom, and I proceed to hang out in the women's bathroom of Red O on Sunset Boulevard for about 12 minutes until my husband says, get out of the bathroom and go talk to people. I wash my hands, I walk out, and immediately I'm struck by somebody whose energy is radiating on this really dark night. It's probably 8:30. The lights are low, red and orange hues, and I see somebody wearing brightly patterned dress, and her smile is like lighting up the room. And the only thing I can think to myself is, who is this person? I immediately, just her energy was so welcoming that I felt safe to break into her circle. And she turns to me and just greets me like we've been friends, not for days, but for years. And she's like, hi, I'm Sandra. What's your name? And then we start talking. And I think that I have found my people. So friends, it is an honor to introduce you to somebody who is my people. Sandra, thank you for being here.
You are my people. You are my heart, Jasmine. And that intro, I'm like, I want to meet this girl too.
Well, I'm so happy you want to meet yourself. So go on and love yourself. And please know that oftentimes we don't know how to see ourselves the way that others see us. And so what I am here just to say is continue shining, because the person I met in that room had joined the mastermind. And if my memory serves me correctly, now remember, this is a conversation that we had once 2 years ago. So please forgive me. But at the time you had joined the mastermind without a very clear plan of what was going to unfold, that you didn't necessarily even have like a digital business, and you weren't necessarily using social media with a strategy, and you were there because you're like, I am feeling called. Am I correct in my memory in that?
I'm the girl, Jasmine, who came up to you and said, Jasmine, what's a ring light? So I definitely had no social media strategy, no social media skills, but just as much as you are complimenting me, this is what I want to say about you, because, and now you're like Jasmine Starr, right?
Oh gosh. I mean, please, for podcasters, I can't roll my eyes back far enough in my head, but go on.
But this is the thing. You had a following. You had a significant following at that time, and I knew nothing. And to this day, honestly, I tell people all the time. Everything I know about social media, I know from Jasmine. So kind, so sweet. At no point, because I was one person, I still think, like, why did they let me in the room? I was the one person who didn't have a business, didn't really have an idea, didn't have social media. I had 100 followers, but you treated me and you answered my questions like I was the most important person in the world. Mm-hmm. And you made me feel that way. And I think that's something that maybe people who don't get an opportunity to meet you in person will never get the chance to appreciate that what you hear, who she is, how she appears on social, that's her. Like, it's all real. It's so real. And I just love you. You know that.
Thank you. Well, I want to just pause here and say thank you. Thank you for, that's the word I'm going to choose for the course of this conversation, is real. I want us to be real because I do believe that that's what it's exuding. That's what I see from you in person. That's what I see from you online. And in your 2-year process, the thing that I have seen again and again is realness personified. And so I really want to bring people on now. Before anybody's listening to this, they're like, I don't really get it. Is this just two friends catching up? Number one, yes. And number two, I have to just break down what I didn't know then was that Sandra's brand, which is how she made somebody feel, preceded anything that I learned about her. I later learned that she has a postgraduate degree in marketing and journalism, including a Master of Science degree in multimedia journalism and documentary filmmaking from Columbia Journalism School. She is a multimedia journalist and she's an award-winning documentary filmmaker. And the concept, please help me pronounce your podcast.
It's Ndini, which I always think about, should I change it? Should I not? And I actually had a conversation earlier this year with my community because Ndini is a word from my mother tongue. So I'm from Zimbabwe. And in my mother tongue, Ndini means I am. So it's really about a declaration, an affirmation of you being who you are and what you say you are being what defines your reality. And so I named it that. And then no one can say it. But it's Ndini.
And it's Ndini.
Ndini, yeah.
Girl, you say it once and people get it. Now, when you converse with your community, what did they say? To keep it or change it?
Oh my gosh, there was mutiny when I said that I wanted to change it. Because I think which I didn't understand, when I named it, really was, like you said, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And then I was like, oh, well, it'd be cool. And I wanted something that symbolized or recognized where I'm from, the fact that I'm from Zimbabwe and that the community largely that I'm speaking to is an African community, although they may not necessarily be in Africa. They may be wherever they are in the world, but it's people who identify as being of African descent. And when I said I wanted to change the name, the feeling was, this is what makes it. This is our identity, the fact that we're so proud to use our languages and our names and trying to, for lack of a better way, whitewash it to make it comfortable for other people to say is not how we should be going about things, that we need to be introducing other people to our languages and what they mean. So yes, we're keeping the name.
I am in total agreement with your community. I don't think it's an impossible word to say once you've been educated. And I think that's what this conversation's about. It's about educating how we get to grow our businesses from different perspectives. Now, before we get into the actual business of a business and the business of a passion and the business of an idea, I would love for you to begin with your story, because I know that you were raised in a mud hut in Zimbabwe, and then the next thing I know is that you graduated with high honors from Columbia Journalism School. So how do we get there? Give us a little bit of the backstory so that we can appreciate the current story.
How long is this podcast? I'm kidding.
I know. Can you just get multiple decades? Yeah.
Give you the Colsner version. So yes, literally, Jasmine, I'm a girl who was raised in a mud hut with no running water, no electricity. And when I was born in Zimbabwe, it was actually Rhodesia at that time. It was a British colony. And in the constitution of our country, it said, because I was a little black girl, my life was worth less than a little white girl who was of the same age. And so I grew up in a segregated country. and grew up with limited opportunities. But my parents, like yours, worked incredibly hard to give us a life that they could never have dreamed of. I literally, like my grandmothers, none of them went to school. None of them could read or write. My mother got her high school diploma when I was 16. So when I was getting my high school diploma. So that's the background that I came from. And it's really, I think it's Maya Angelou who said, I come as one, but I stand as 10,000, that it's all these women, all these people who sacrifice so much so that they could lift me up and raise me up and give me opportunities they could never have dreamed of. And so long story short, I graduated high school. Then I had the opportunity to move to the United Kingdom to go to university there. And I studied, didn't have any funding. So I worked 2 jobs full time while I was doing a full-time degree to fund myself through school. Eventually got a job after I graduated, then moved to Canada. And then my husband and I, who is also from Zimbabwe, started a company, a management consulting company. And whether it was just dumb luck or I don't know, very quickly that company took off and very quickly became a 8-figure company in a matter of a few years. And what then happened is, in part, because it happened so quickly, and then it also happened to align with a crash in stock markets, crash in oil prices, overnight, we were on the brink of bankruptcy. So we built this life. You can imagine for me being this little girl who'd grown up with nothing. And then now I'm living this life where I have a nice car and I live in a nice house and all of this kind of stuff. And then we're literally on the brink of bankruptcy. And it was in that, and this is something I want to say to, especially in the time that we're in, where there are people who are going through incredibly challenging times. This global pandemic has just really wreaked havoc on many people's lives, is that sometimes your darkest moments lead to your greatest breakthroughs. Because I had nothing to lose, that's what prompted me to apply to Columbia. That's what prompted me to go to Columbia and completely switch paths. I was on this management career path. We were living this life, but I wasn't happy, Jasmine. And here's what made me feel extra bad, was coming from where I'd come from. And then I'm living this life that honestly, my cousins can only imagine they would give their right arm for. And it felt like, how can you be unhappy? Like, how can you be unhappy? You have a nice car, nice house, you have a great husband. Why are you unhappy? But I was unhappy. It felt like I was living a life that was shades of gray. Not 50, 49 shades.
This is a PG podcast, girl.
Like, it felt like my life was colorless, which made no sense because, well, this is what you dreamed of. And it wasn't until I was on the brink of losing it all, like we literally had lost it all, that I realized that what I'd been chasing, the things that I thought would bring me happiness, were not actually the things that brought me happiness. And that was more about purpose. And that's what I found with Ndini and creating this platform.
So talk to me about being on the brink of bankruptcy. What year is this? And what year do you apply to Columbia? What year do you graduate? Just for some context.
Yeah, so this was 2013, things started to be a little bit rocky. 2014 was when we went into full on, like, okay, I'm on my bathroom floor boohooing. And when I'm on my bathroom floor crying, things are bad because I'm a germaphobe. So 2014, and me applying to Columbia was actually a fluke. And it's one of those where, like, when I look back on it, it doesn't make sense because I'm not their typical profile of who they admit into the school. I had none journalism experience. Columbia is like I'll say they're the greatest journalism school on the planet. Home of the Pulitzers, home of the DuPonts. And so I had no business being there. I had no business applying. And it was actually I had accompanied my husband, who was kind of thinking about, well, what was he going to do next? And he wanted to do a PhD. And so we went to a career fair and I had no interest. Like, I was really just like, licking my wounds and just sad and life sucked. And when we got to this career fair, we kind of walked in, and the very first university that we came to was the Columbia Journalism career stand. Now, don't tell them this. I didn't know what Columbia Journalism was.
Stop. Oh, my Lord.
It was an Ivy League university. Didn't know any of that. And the only reason I went was it was right in front of me. And there were also very few people of color. This was in San Diego where this fair was. And the guy who was the admissions director who was at the Columbia stand was a man of color, a gentleman of color. I thought, oh, my people, hello there. Let's chit chat. And we ended up having literally an hour, maybe hour and a half conversation. And at the end of the conversation, he said to me, I really think you should apply to journalism school. You're not our typical profile. You're not what we typically want, but apply. You never know. And I did. And one of those were, again, dumb luck maybe. They were like, oh, all right, we'll let you in. It didn't register what I had done. And so that's literally how I ended up at Columbia. And it was really, I've always loved storytelling. So I think that's what attracted me to their program. It was a way for me to learn how to hone the skill of storytelling. And so I went to Columbia, and yeah, that's how I ended up there.
So I've heard it 3 times. Dumb luck. Girl, there ain't no dumb luck. You need to stop using that. I'm going to forbid you. Every time you say dumb luck because of your sheer will, talent, energy, divine intervention, you're going to owe me a margarita. And if I end up drunk at the end of this podcast, I'm coming after you because we got too much to talk about. There's too much important things to talk about. So
shots. Yeah, bring shots.
I know. Exactly. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. So now that we have this deeper, richer understanding and appreciation for your methodology, even if there is a lack thereof of a methodology, there had to have been something. And we're going to get a little bit more. And I think we can use your methodology. It's going to expose itself as we start talking about the creative process of developing Nadini. However, at the time where we met, Nadini was it was not even a thing, right?
It was I kind of sort of had an idea. And here's why I had the idea. And here's where, going to Columbia really opened my eyes to what was possible. Was what I knew was, as a Black woman, as an African woman moving through this world, and as an African woman in particular living in the first world, what I came across a lot was ignorance, and not ignorance in a mean or in a mean way, but just people don't often hear stories about Africa and African women beyond, for the most part, most people's only exposure to Africa is either a story about someone going on a safari or what they see in the ads for aid organizations. So that's kind of, okay, there's safaris and lions and there's poor people. And yet I knew, as someone who'd grown up in Zimbabwe, as someone who traveled across Africa, that there was such a wealth of stories. There was such a wealth of, I really wanted to tell the stories of women who were doing phenomenal things, and yet we never heard about them. And for me, the frustration was, I didn't really see reflected in mainstream media people who looked like me. And I was hungry to hear stories of women who looked like me. I wanted to be inspired to see possibilities for myself based on, oh, she did it. And it just didn't really exist. And so that's where my inspiration came from. It was really, to be quite honest, for selfish reasons. I wanted to know, who are these women and what are their stories and how do they get to be successful and how do we start to tell a different narrative? And that's what really prompted me to start on this journey of, how do I do that?
And that was the reason why I wanted to have the conversation with you here today, because it doesn't matter how many times I tell people, just do the dang thing. Action brings clarity. And I feel like I tried to model it to the best of my ability. But this conversation right here is, I am so blown away with what you've done with your podcast. I'm so blown away with what you've done with your mission and the impact that you're having and how big you're dreaming. And that's 2 years. What I see happen, it's actually, quite honestly, it's less than 2 years. It hasn't even been official 2 years. To see what has happened and transpired that's where I want to tap. And I also want to incorporate the stories that you've learned from other African women, because the people who went before you paved the way for you to do what you want to do. Now I want you to share that on this podcast so people can see how much more similar than we are dissimilar. So we've now discussed the two depictions of African women, or Africa in itself. Is there's safaris and there's people who need help. And you put together this podcast. You don't know what a ring light is. Throw back to that early conversation. You don't really know how to get things started. And there was a point in the mastermind where you were toying with this idea and you were trying to put words around what it was without actually having the words. At what point did you decide, okay, I'm going to leave Los Angeles because our masterminds were in Los Angeles and you're going to go back to Canada? What did that look like? Like, what was the process of, I am declaring this, and then how long did it take from declaration to actually implementation?
You said something really important there, Jasmine, where you said that our stories are more alike than they are different. And one of the things that being in that mastermind gifted me with was to sit in a room of people like yourself, like Robin, like Stacy, like all these amazing people who were doing incredible things. And that allowed me to start to believe that, oh, maybe I can do it too. And I'm going to say this, and I hope your audience is going to understand. I'm not trying to blow smoke up you or behind or anything, but part of what inspired me, Jasmine, was you. When I literally am looking, on my right-hand side, I have a note that you wrote to me at the very beginning of do you remember the very first day we wrote each other notes?
I do.
And you wrote me this note, and it was, again, the way you and all the group made me feel like, oh yeah, you can do it. It was almost like the seed was there, but that started to water it. And then, no word of a lie, I would watch you, Jasmine. I would watch, do you remember, you don't do it anymore, but do you remember when you used to do your coffee and conversations? And
girl, I still do them.
I don't.
Because, well, Instagram doesn't keep it on stories anymore. It'll catalog it into IGTV, which is kind of like a death zone, but I continue showing up with the hope that Instagram will change the algorithm. It's neither here nor there. I'm still doing it. I'm still showing up. I'm going to find a way to still be connected with you. But go on. It's not about me, boo-boo. It's about you. It's about you.
Others, trust me, I'm like a stalker. He literally asked me one time, like, because I referred to you, like, in first, like, oh, Jasmine said, and Jasmine. And he's like, who's Jasmine? This is how much I remember. I would watch you, and I remember you telling the story of how you would take the paper towel and fold it and put it behind your phone to prop it up. Yeah. And then I remember DMing you one time and asking you, Jasmine, you know, when you do your lives, like, how do you light them and what microphone do you use? And you said to me, I just use a bar cart and I'm facing a window. So, little things that learning from you and then learning from, you know, what Robin was doing, like, gave me the confidence to start showing up that, all I need is my phone and a piece of paper towel and I can go live. And then here's too the other thing that I think is so powerful, because a lot of the time we minimize our stories because we think, oh, people would never be interested in that. But it was you showing up so authentically and saying things like, you know, every time before I go live, I'm so nervous. Then I was like, oh, if Jasmine's nervous, that's okay that I'm nervous. So all these things that led to me slowly starting to believe and then learning. And I signed up for Social Curator Day. And not that this is an ad, this ad. But no, really, this is what I'm trying to say is whoever you are, however small your platform is, your voice has power. I think we think if I don't have 100,000 followers or if I don't have a big platform that, oh, you know, no one cares. You are inspiring someone who's watching you who is inspired to take action because you are taking action. And that's the power of story. And that's what I've learned too, is that our stories are the same. You know, whether you're a mom in Zimbabwe or whether you're a mom in England or wherever you are, we all dream the same dream. So yeah, absolutely.
I have to say, I remember distinctly writing you the note, and I remember this distinct pull inside of me, like Pull, a pull, like a magnetic attraction, because I believed in the dream. And I believed that there was space, and I believed there was a need for stories like that to be told. And Let's go back to the first time you decide to have an interview. Describe what that looks like, because I'm going to describe it from my perspective on the outside looking in, and I want to see how close they are.
Oh my gosh, Jasmine. It was like literally my heart was pounding out of my chest. My mouth is so dry. I can't get the words out. And I'm like, please, just like, don't let me pass out in front of this person. That literally is how it felt. And here's the funny thing is I've done at least 100, more than 100 interviews at this point. There's never been an interview where I'm not nervous. I don't feel that like, oh, I hope I don't mess this up. But that literally it was like the fear of, oh my gosh, like, what if I mess this up? What if I do this wrong? What if I? But going back to, I'd seen people like you and like all these other amazing people that I admired feel the fear and do it anyway. And so that gave me that like, oh, if they can do it, you can do it too. It gave me that belief.
And so what I hear is a very different side from what I saw, because what you put out on the first go around, I was like, oh, Sandra don't mess around. Like when she decided to do a podcast, you had recorded it. You were talking to somebody just a few feet away from you. Like it looked so well done. And I was like, oh, this is much bigger. It's much better. It's so much more refined. It's so you. It was such a brilliant first run that I was like, whoa, that's her podcast. Like you set the bar really high. So I want to put a pause, because as people listen to the podcast, I know that the people who listen, they're dreamers, they're hustlers, they're doers. And I don't want this to be simply like a feel good, oh, warm and fuzzy. Like I want to start mapping to what Sandra did. She put herself in situations. So she sat in the suck and she decided to go to a career fair without actually really knowing what she wanted to do in a career. And what did she do? She just talked to people, and she put herself in places where people actually spoke truth into her life that she couldn't necessarily see for herself. But that wasn't enough. It is not enough for somebody like me or Sandra, your mom, your dad, or a random counselor from Columbia Journalism School who said you should apply. That's not enough. You have to do something, and you have to do it simple, and you have to do it messy, and you have to do it scrappy. And, you know, Sandra's version of messy and scrappy looks like the freaking Bloomingdale's version of scrappy, but it's neither here nor there. The queen showed up, and what she did is she stepped into the unknown. She was taking action despite not knowing the next step. So now that we're here, and now that she can say, oh, I've interviewed stories of over 100 African women, what I want to know is, what were the stories that you wish to tell? Either in documentaries, in whatever, because you did submit a documentary. You did do a documentary. Like you have tons of awards, and y'all really need to check her out. She's so amazing. If I were to talk about all of her accolades, I'd be talking for hours. But what do you wish, now that you've been in the game, and we're going to talk about the things that you've learned from the women you've interviewed, but before we get into their stories, let's talk about, like, now that you've been in it, what do you wish you could tell or do more of and showcase women and their capabilities for success?
I think it's what we've talked about, that we're so much more similar than we are different. I think that's the thing that I want to show people, is that, you know, just because it's someone from over there doesn't make their dreams any less valid, doesn't make them have smaller dreams, doesn't, like, we're so similar. And I think that's the common theme that I hear. But something you said too, Jasmine, is action. That's the one thing that consistently I hear and I see from all the women that I interview, is that for so many of them, they didn't have a clear path. It wasn't clearly mapped out that this is what is going to happen, and 5 years from now, this is what you'll do, and then 10-year plan and all of that, that they just took one step. They felt the fear, did it anyway, and took the step. And I think what all of them tell me is that that's the point where so many of us get stuck, is we feel the fear and we allow the fear to consume us. And a lot of the time, I mean, what I've learned from interviewing these women and from my own life is that a lot of the time our fear is ego driven, that it's fear of what will other people think. And it's fear of, you know, will I look stupid? Will I look like I know what I'm doing? Which is what I felt. I didn't want to look dumb. I didn't want to ask people questions because, well, then they'll look at me like, oh, she doesn't know what a ring light is. But it is, you're never going to achieve that big dream unless you take action. It's not just you can and and I think sometimes as well, like all this I believe in manifestation, but manifestation is not what many people think. Like, oh, I'm just gonna like sit here and visualize. No, visualize, then go do something about your visualization.
Big facts.
And I think too, the other thing that I've learned both through my own experience and then also from all the women that I've interviewed is that who do you need to be to step into that? I think a lot of the time we think that, oh, I'll eventually figure it out and then I'll eventually become. It's almost like you need to reverse engineer it to think about, well, if I wanted to be, I don't know, if I wanted to be Serena Williams and be the greatest tennis player of all time, who do I need to be? Start there. Like, what are the ways of behavior? What are the ways of thinking? And then act. Can't believe I'm about to say this. I'm going to quote Jamie Foxx.
Hey, I am here for Mr. Fox. Yes, please. The double X. Okay.
Jamie Foxx said something that has stayed with me. When he won his Academy Award and he went up to give his acceptance speech, he said, "My grandma gave me the greatest acting lesson ever. She told me, act like you've got sense." And I thought, gosh, that's the piece that so many of us are missing, is that we're waiting to have the courage, we're waiting to have the whatever it is for us to then do the thing. But it's almost like just act, just pretend. Put on your Sasha Fierce alter ego and pretend that if I was already doing this thing, how would I be in the world? And that can be your first step to pretending. And then after a while, that pretending becomes second nature.
Can you think of maybe one or two guests who you've interviewed that embody the putting on something before it is actually of you? Like, what were some of those stories that you're just like, wow, it left an indelible impression?
The person who actually said something along those lines is, she's an incredible singer, dancer, performer. She's one of the biggest African female performers. Her name is Yemi Alade. Check her out. She was actually on the Lion King soundtrack with Beyonce and co. Okay. And Yemi said that. She was talking about it, but in the context of, she has a song on one of her older albums where she says, "Don't call me a queen, call me a king." And when I interviewed her, I was like, why would you want to be called a queen? Like, you're a queen. And she said, no, when I wrote that song, what I realized is that in the music industry, the people who got ahead, the people who like just walked in the room and owned it as if, they'd been doing it all their life, were the men. The men didn't have any of this fear and any of this. They just owned it. And so she said, I needed to find a way to get in that mindset of being, if I was a guy, just walk in and own it. And so she wrote a song called King.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I feel like whenever I'm feeling like a little nervous, I'm going to be like, I'm going to walk in like a king, like I'm walking like royalty.
I mean, I like being a queen and everything like that's it. I was like, yeah, I like the song, but I like being a queen.
You know what? On that note, because you say you like to be a queen, can I read something that I read on your Instagram?
Okay. I feel like, is this like an Instagram audit? Like, when you do
no, girl, no.
This is rubbish.
It is not an Instagram audit. It is an Instagram accolade. You wrote, I am determined to lead by example for my Black sisters, to create opportunities, to create seats at the table, and to continue to keep sending the elevator back down. I have struggled, cried, fought, and yelled for my melanin skin. I will continue to do so until humanity prevails. I fall, I rise. I make mistakes, I learn. I get hurt, I bounce back. I am not perfect. I am human. I have confidence. I have faith. I will continue putting one foot in front of the other, moving forward. That's what strong Black women do. My friend, if a queen did not write that, I don't know who did.
All right. Okay, so that was, I actually modified. I actually got that from a beautiful Black queen, Teresa, a friend of mine. And then I adapted it to myself. But yes, it was written by a beautiful Black queen. You're absolutely right.
Well, it takes a queen to know a queen. But I think that I can't help but step back. And I'm thankful that we gave honor and respect to the originator. But I also think that that is the beauty of storytelling, is taking a story and then molding it to making it your own. And so I think that it's so important that as we listen to this, I don't want anybody to listen to the conversation and think that Sandra could do something because she's Sandra, or that Jasmine could do something because she's Jasmine. The beauty of storytelling is taking bits of her story and bits of my story and then creating your own story. And I think if I could speak correctly, that's what Sandra wants her podcast to do, is to showcase the stories of African women and take a bit of their story and incorporate it into your own and understand more about your story and understand more about their stories.
I couldn't agree more with I'd love to. I wish in my next life, I want to be Jasmine Star. I really do. But I will never be. And me trying to be anybody other than myself is going to be a poor copy. Like, it's kind of, you're too young to remember this, but back in the day when they used to do invoices and receipts, they'd have carbon paper between the different layers, and you'd write on the top, and then it would copy on the whatever down into, makes different copies. But the further away you got from the original, the lighter and the less clear it was. And I feel like that's how it is, that when you're trying to copy somebody else and trying to be like somebody else, you'll never succeed. You can never be that person. But what you can do is a damn good job of being yourself. Because if you think about the odds of you being you here in this moment, it's phenomenal what had to happen for you to be here. And so I think that part of what we see, and what I see, is that fear is, everyone talks about, be yourself, but we're all afraid to be ourselves because ourselves might be different than what the norm is. And I think that's what we need to give ourselves permission to do, is to truly be yourself. You don't have to be like anybody else. And I think that the people we resonate with, the people we like, it is because they've dared to march to a different drum. And that's what attracts us to them.
So true. So now we've got through your origin story. We got through you stepping into fear, feeling it and doing it anyway. We talked about storytelling and the modification of. Now let's get into the business practicality, because I do want to anchor the conversation and I don't know where things are. So if you are uncomfortable talking about it, we don't have to talk about it. But I want to talk about the business of Ndini, specifically. Where are you at in it? Have you monetized? Is Ndini a passion in addition to your other business, or is Ndini your business? Or is it going to be your business? Where are we at in that, so that we can look at people who are listening and be like, I don't know if I can actually turn this thing that I'm passionate about into a business. Have you turned it into a business?
I'm actually in the process of turning it into a business. And
spill the tea. Spill it.
Spill the tea. Okay. So here's what happened is, for a long time, and this was my struggle, and this is, I think, something that sometimes we have to just, come to Jesus about and just be truthful, is for a long time, I pushed and tried to figure out how could I monetize and how could I make money off the podcast and telling people stories. And my reality is, it's a hard sell, and not a hard sell in the sense of I had to decide what I was comfortable with. And that was, did I want somebody else? Because I had sponsors who came along and said, yeah, we'll sponsor, yeah, whatever. And I had to make the decision. Did I want somebody else driving the agenda of the kinds of stories that I could tell because I wanted the money? Or did I want this to be something that in a way was pure? And that's something, Jasmine, that I struggled with. And I came to the conclusion that I love the purity of what I'm doing, just being able to go talk to people, have them share their stories without me feeling like, oh, I need to satisfy a sponsor. Not to say that there's anything wrong with that. Like, I think, hey, if that's you, do
Right.
you, as my friend Jasmine would say. And what I figured out, though, was that there is another opportunity in that same space of telling stories. So I'm actually, this is breaking news, I'm actually working right now with a team where I've written a book with my husband, and it is all about a journey across Africa. Because one of the things, too, that I recognized, there are a few things that we recognize. So I have nieces and nephews who are growing up outside of our home country, outside of Zimbabwe. And so for them, they're still young and they have no concept of their homeland or, what Africa is like. I mean, they go visit, but it's not the same thing. And it was in these conversations that we realized there is a gap. There's a gap in storytelling for kids and helping them understand, A, to learn about Africa, and then B, to learn about the stories specific to their country. And so my husband and I have been working on a project, which we're in the process of pitching right now, which is an animated series. It's a superhero story all about Africa, all African heroes, where they travel across Africa and go to the different countries to, regions of interest or landmarks of interest. And through that, telling the story. And then kind of associated with that, there's merchandise and that kind of stuff. So that's what I figured out in the end was, okay, I'll keep this thing here, which is the interviews, but still related to that and telling African stories is this other side of the business that we're building. So I'm actually in the process of building, I guess, a company called Ndini Studios, which will be animation.
Stop right now. Just see, and this right here, this is the messy middle. So often when we have podcast guests come on, it's like we talk about things in retrospect. Brene Brown calls it gold-plated grit. We talk about a difficult time in our lives, but then we gold-plated and said, that was hard, we got through it, and here is where I am today. I am talking to a person who spent 2 years building out her ability to be a storyteller, stepping into fear, and this wasn't the thing. It is part of the thing. It is part of Ndini Studios.
It wasn't even a thing, Jasmine, until literally, and it was something that I resisted because for me, I was so hung up on figuring out, how do I make this podcast make money? How do I make this podcast make money? And I was getting so frustrated. And then I was at a point where I was kind of burnt out with it. Where I was like, do I keep going? And it was literally, again, inspiration comes. It was literally conversations about nieces and nephews where my husband's trying to explain to them about, oh, do you know about Victoria Falls? And they're looking at him like, blank. And he's like, it's in your country, blank. And then I'm trying to tell them, oh, have you ever heard of Great Zimbabwe? No. And my husband and I looked at each other like, oh my gosh, these kids are never going to know about their history. And then my nephew, our original intention was to write a book because we're like, oh, let's write a book and, with all these things. And my nephew, who's so honest as you are when you're 9 years old, he said, like my husband's telling him, it's like, oh, Emmanuel, we're going to write a book about, and, all these places we're telling you about. And he kind of like turned his nose up and he said, Uncle, I'm not the reading kind. Is there going to be a movie? And that literally was the moment. It's like, an animated series. And so talking about messy, yes, I went to Columbia, but I didn't learn animation. I kind of sort of know about documentary filmmaking because I've made some documentary films, knew nothing about animation. I've had to crash course in, what is animation? Oh, you need an illustrator. Oh, you have to storyboard. Oh, you need to rig it. Oh, what is the difference between 3D and 2D? And I'm learning all this stuff as we go. And it's hard. Oh my gosh, it's hard. But my gosh, Jasmine, I get to the end of every day and I'm just lit up. I'm just so excited about it.
I just want to speak to something from a business perspective, because somebody could be hearing this and say, okay, well, was that a short ladder for Sandra? Like the podcast was 2 years. What did she get as a result of the 2 years? Never mind the fact that she has entrenched herself with so many African women and those connections and those conversations and that network. So beyond just that, because that right there is really rich collateral that very few people, even if you had an animation studio and you were born to be an animator, without the connections, it's very hard to get the leverage. In addition to that, when I could just see you pitching yourself to studios, when it comes to actually licensing for merchandise for your content, you could say, as a result of interviewing hundreds and hundreds of African women, I have a very distinct insight that nobody else has. Some of these women are mothers. Some of them people, they're going to be the people to help me promote it. It becomes a very different conversation when your network becomes your net worth. So to anybody who's sitting here and being like, oh, well, what was that for? She did, and she has something that the 1% of the 1% hardly ever has.
So I completely agree with you in that I think it would be a very different conversation. I mean, even as we've gone and started to pitch to, people, it's a different conversation that, oh, there's something that exists and there's a body of work. Yes, it's not directly related to what we're doing, but there is a relationship in that. Yes, I've spoken to all these women who are mothers who are telling me that they're frustrated because there is literally one show on television that they can find that, speaks to, that has cartoon characters that are, of African origin. So that is all insight that I've been able to get from all these conversations. And I don't believe that any effort is ever wasted. I'm a big believer in there's no such thing as failure. It's just feedback. Like everything's just telling me, okay, the podcast wasn't exactly how I thought that I'd be like, Lewis has, and I actually said that to him one time, like I think in my application for his mastermind, I said, I want to be the female Black African Lewis. That didn't quite go according to plan, but there's so much I've learned. And even as I'm saying to you that, yes, it's not exactly the same thing, but the things that I've learned from production of a podcast, like there are things that I'm further ahead in, like now, like we're having conversations about sound design and, so there are things that, I don't know everything, but I'm like, oh yeah, with the podcast, we have to remember this and remember that. So there are always some things that, that you can leverage that you from things you've done in the past.
Sandra, I don't want to sound like Jerry Maguire, but you complete me. Okay. I just want to say that before we tie things up, this right here is the journey, a creator's journey. This right here is the process of building a business that will be. And so we build as if our success is a foregone conclusion. And manifestation is only as good as the actions you take to deploy against the vision of the future that you see. And I'm going to read one last Instagram post that you wrote. To every single woman who has ever felt less than or made to feel that somehow you took up too much space in the world, go ahead, take up that space. When you are not afraid to take your space and be strong and beautiful and bold and fight like hell, when you do that, the view is incredible. I want to say thank you for coming on and showing us how to take up space. And how to take up space without knowing what the outcome will be and having the humility and the wherewithal to continue building, knowing that the future might look different than how we originally imagined it. Thank you for sharing your brilliance. Thank you for being you. How can people go deep with you after this conversation? How can they find your podcast? How can they find you on Instagram? How can they support?
I so appreciate it. And I so appreciate you. And there's so much I could say, so much, but just suffice to say, thank you for being you, because what you do has reached far beyond what you know. Yeah, it has reached far beyond what you know. And you inspire so many, myself included, to step into our fear, to step in and do things that we're afraid of. But because we see you stepping into your fear and being so open and honest about it, it gives us permission to step into our dreams. Thank you, Jasmine.
Thank you.
To find me, my Instagram, probably Instagram, like, because I'm from the Jasmine School social. So Instagram's my thing. But you can find me at sandra.chuma. And through that, you can find Ndini as well. Ndini is Ndini Media, which is Ndini Media, Media. And you can find me on my website, which is sandrachuma.com.
Friends, just as a note, you can also find direct links to her website and Instagram from the show notes, from from wherever you're listening to. So you can definitely take a pin, find her down, search for the most radiant, beautiful African woman on Instagram, and there you will see her glorious face. Sandra, thank you. You are a gift. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and wealth. And thank you for reminding us of how much more we have in common than we do not. I love and appreciate you, friend.
And I love you, my friend.
Wasn't that just amazing? Sandra is undoubtedly one of the most educated, inspiring, and powerful women I've ever known. And I'm so honored to have shared this really amazing conversation with you. If you loved mine and Sandra's interview, please leave a review on Apple Podcast by simply searching The Jasmine Star Show on iTunes, clicking on write a review, and let me know. Plus, after you leave an iTunes review, you can head to jasminestar.com/IG branding to snag my 3-part Instagram branding course for free. This mini audio course is designed to help you intentionally show up on Instagram and create a recognizable brand for your business by creating a purpose-driven account, by playing up your profile so your followers recognize you instantly, and getting real engagement with your audience. So friend, simply leave an iTunes review and then head to jasminestar.com/IG branding to get your branding game on. Well, friend, thank you so much for tuning into the Jasmine Star Show today. Here's to the strong women. May we know them. May we be them. May we raise them. And for my brothers who are listening too, may you support us so we can support you too. I had to say that for JD. All right, friends. Chat soon.